For 6 straight months, my son and I lived in a homeless shelter while my late wife's family raised champagne glasses inside the house I built with my own hands. They looked at me and said, "You're a leech. Figure it out yourself." Then on a freezing night at 2 a.m., someone knocked on the fogged-up window of my car. I froze thinking it was the police, but the woman standing there wasn't holding a ticket. She was holding something far heavier: property documents. She leaned closer and whispered, "I've been looking for you." 1 week later, a dying billionaire asked to see me, and the people who destroyed my life were about to pay a very different price. Thank you for being here with me. If you've made it this far, I'd love to know, where are you watching from? Right now, drop your city in the comments. And tell me this: what would you do if your own family turned their backs on you at your lowest moment? Also, please note, this story includes some fictionalized elements added for storytelling and learning. Any similarities to real, nah. My name is Warren Hensley, and this is how I took back everything they stole from my son. It started on a Tuesday, the kind of November night in Chicago where the wind feels like it has personal vendetta against you. The public library was closing. That was our sanctuary. It was warm. It was quiet, and the bathrooms were clean. My son Leo is 38 years old, but his mind stopped aging the day a steel beam collapsed on him at a construction site 10 years ago. He was sitting on the floor in the biography section, looking at pictures in a book about trains. He loves trains. He started coughing, a deep rattling sound that seemed to shake his thin frame. The librarian, a woman who had let us stay late before, finally walked over. She didn't look me in the eye. She just looked at the clock. "I know," I said. "We are going. Getting Leo up is a process. His legs get stiff in the cold." I wrapped his scarf tighter, the one his mother knitted before the cancer took her. "Come on, buddy," I whispered. "Time to go on patrol." That is what I told him we were doing. We weren't homeless. We were on a secret patrol mission. It was the only way to keep him from being scared of the dark. We walked out into the biting wind. My old Honda Civic was parked 3 blocks away to avoid towing, but I knew we couldn't go there yet. It was too cold to turn the engine off, and I only had a quarter tank of gas left to last us until Friday. I checked my pocket. $7.40. That was it. That was my entire net worth. I saw the neon sign of a burger joint down the street. It wasn't much, but it was heat. We walked in, and the smell of grease and stale coffee hit me like a luxury perfume. We ordered 1 cheeseburger and a cup of water. I cut the burger in half. "That you eat Leo," I said. "Dad is not hungry." That was a lie. My stomach was twisting itself into knots, but watching him eat was the only thing that kept me sane. He ate with the pure, messy joy of a child getting ketchup on his chin. I reached over with a napkin to wipe it off. That is when the door chimed. A blast of cold air followed a group of 3 men in expensive wool coats. I didn't look up. I learned quickly on the streets that eye contact is an invitation for trouble, but I recognized the voice. It was a booming, arrogant laugh that I hadn't heard since the funeral. Charles Halstead, my brother-in-law, the man who was currently sitting in the CEO chair of the company my wife's father founded. The man who signed the safety checks on the site where my son's skull was crushed. I tried to shrink into the booth. "Please God," I prayed, "just let them get their coffee and leave." But life is rarely that kind. Leo saw the men. He saw the shiny cufflinks on Charles's wrist as he passed our table. Leo loves shiny things. He reached out his coordination, clumsy from the cold and the brain injury. His hand knocked over the cup of water. It wasn't hot, thank goodness, but it splashed right onto Charles Halstead's Italian leather shoes. The restaurant went silent. Charles jumped back, cursing. He looked down at his shoe like it had been doused in acid. "Watch where you are going, you idiot," he snarled. Then he looked up. He looked at Leo, who was trembling, trying to hide behind his hands. Then he looked at me. The recognition dawned on his face, slowly followed by a sneer that was uglier than any scar. "Well, well, well," Charles said, his voice loud enough for the whole room to hear. "Look who it is, the great Warren Hensley. Victoria told me you were living rough, but I didn't think you had sunk this low." Leo started to whimper. I stood up, placing my hand on my son's shoulder to calm him. "We are leaving Charles," I said, my voice raspy. "No trouble." Charles blocked the aisle. He wasn't going to let this go. He turned to his business partners. "You guys know this loser? This is my late wife's sister's husband. Used to be a big shot contractor. Now look at him splitting a $1 burger with the retard." My blood ran cold. I felt the heat rising in my neck. "You can say whatever you want about me, Charles," I said, stepping closer. "But do not talk about my son." Charles laughed. It was a dry, hollow sound. Or what Warren, you're going to hit me. You can't even afford a lawyer to bail you out. Victoria was right. You are a leech. You drained Martha's accounts for her treatments, and now you are probably looking for a handout. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a $20 bill. He didn't hand it to me. He crumpled it up and threw it on the dirty floor next to the puddle of water. There, he said, go buy some diapers for the boy and maybe a breath mint for yourself. You smell like a sewer. The room was dead silent. The cashier, the other customers, everyone was watching. The $20 lay there. It was more money than I had seen in a week. It could buy gas. It could buy Leo a hot breakfast. All I had to do was bend down and pick it up. All I had to do was swallow my pride. Leo looked at the money, then at me. Dad, he asked, his voice shaking, did I do bad? Laosi, I said loud and clear. You did nothing wrong. I looked Charles in the eye. I wanted to smash his teeth in. I wanted to scream about the insurance money they withheld about the house they foreclosed on. But I knew that if I touched him, I would go to jail, and Leo would go to the state system. That was probably what they wanted. Keep it, Charles, I said. You are going to need it more than I do. I grabbed Leo's hand and we walked past them. I stepped right over the $20 bill. I didn't look back even as Charles laughed and called me a fool. We walked out into the freezing night. The wind hit us instantly, cutting through my thin jacket. My hands were shaking not from the cold, but from the adrenaline. I am cold, Dad, Leo whispered. I know, son, I said, opening the car door. I know. We climbed into the back seat of the Civic. I had a pile of blankets I had scavenged from a dumpster behind a motel. I covered Leo up, tucking the edges in like I used to when he was a baby in a crib. I climbed in next to him, using my body heat to keep him warm. I stared out the window at the dark parking lot. I could still see Charles inside the restaurant, laughing, eating a meal that cost more than my car was worth. I closed my eyes, fighting back tears. A man manages to hold it together for a long time. But that night, watching my son shiver because I was too proud to pick up $20, I felt like I had failed. I was 70 years old. I had built skyscrapers. I had employed hundreds of men. And now, I couldn't even keep my son warm. I didn't know that just 2 miles away, in a warm-lit apartment building, a secret was waiting that would turn Charles Halstead's laughter into a scream. I didn't know that the clock was already ticking on their destruction. All I knew was the cold and the promise I whispered into the dark. I am going to fix this, Leo. I swear on your mother's grave, I am going to fix this. Before I tell you what happened when the lawyer knocked on the window, I want to ask you a question. Have you ever been kicked when you were down by your own family? Tell me your story in the comments. I read every single one. And if you believe in karma, hit that like button, because karma was coming for Charles Halstead and it was driving a black Mercedes. The heater in my '99 Honda Civic was dying. It rattled like a bag of marbles every time I turned the fan past the first setting. I sat in the driver's seat with the engine idling, watching the needle on the fuel gauge hover just above the red line. It was a game of Russian roulette I played every night. If I ran the engine for 15 minutes, we would be warm enough to fall asleep. But if I ran it for 20, we might not have enough gas to drive to the food pantry in the morning. Leo was already asleep in the back. I adjusted the rear view mirror to look at him. He was curled into a tight ball beneath 3 layers of wool blankets I had scavenged. His breath came out in small white puffs that lingered in the stagnant air of the car. Seeing him like that, sleeping with his mouth slightly open, trusting me to keep the world away, broke my heart in a way that Charles Halstead's insults never could. I turned the key and killed the engine. The silence that followed was heavy and immediate. The cold began to creep back in through the thin metal doors instantly. I reached into the cup holder and pulled out the handful of change I had left. $7.40. I counted it again by the light of a street lamp filtering through the frosted window. 4 quarters, 3 dimes, a crumpled $5 bill. This was it. This was everything. I did the math in my head for the 1,000th time. If I spent $2 on a gallon of gas, we would have $5.40 left for food. A loaf of bread was $1.50. Peanut butter was $3. We could make it to Friday, maybe. My hands were rough, the skin cracked and stained from 50 years of handling brick and mortar. But they were shaking as I held those coins. I wasn't shaking from the cold. I was shaking from the rage that I kept bottled up inside. The rage that kept me awake while my son slept. My mind drifted back to the day that put us here. 6 months ago, the day we buried Martha. It had been raining. Of course it was raining. The Halstead family stood on one side of the grave under a canopy of black umbrellas, dry and pristine. I stood on the other side, with Leo getting soaked because I had given my umbrella to an old neighbor who had come to pay respects. After the service, Victoria Halstead had walked up to me. She didn't offer a hug. She didn't offer a condolence. She offered me an envelope. I thought it was a letter from Martha. I opened it with trembling fingers. It was a notice of eviction. Martha died with significant debt, Warren. Victoria had said, her voice smooth and devoid of emotion. Her medical bills were astronomical. The house is leveraged. The bank is taking it. And since you signed those papers transferring power of attorney to me when she went into the coma, I have already liquidated the assets to cover the creditors. I stared at her, the rain dripping off my nose onto the paper. But that house is paid for, I had stammered. I built that addition with my own hands. Martha told me we were safe. Victoria had sighed the way one sighs at a slow child. Martha lied to protect you, Warren. She knew you couldn't handle the truth. You are destitute. The family has discussed it. We are not going to support you. You are on your own. I tried to fight it. I went to the bank. I went to legal aid. But Victoria had the paperwork. She had the expensive lawyers. She had the Halstead name. Within a week, the locks were changed. Within a month, my savings were drained trying to fight a battle I couldn't win. And now, here I was, counting nickels in a Walmart parking lot, terrified that the police would tap on the window and tell me I couldn't park here anymore. I checked my watch. It was 2:17 in the morning. My eyes were heavy burning with exhaustion. I leaned my head back against the headrest and closed my eyes listening to the wind howl outside. I must have drifted off because the sound that woke me wasn't the wind. Knock, knock, knock. My heart hammered against my ribs. I sat up straight, my instinct for flight kicking in. I looked out the driver's side window. A figure was standing there silhouetted against the parking lot lights. I couldn't see a uniform, but that didn't mean anything. Private security was sometimes worse than the police. They didn't just ask you to leave. They liked to rough you up first. I didn't roll down the window. I just stared, hoping they would think the car was empty and move on. Knock, knock, knock. It was more persistent this time, sharp, authoritative. Mr. Hensley. A voice came through the glass. It was a woman's voice, not a shout, but clear. I know you are in there. Please, I just need to talk to you. I hesitated. A woman alone in this part of town at 2 o'clock in the morning? It didn't make sense. I looked in the back seat. Leo was still asleep undisturbed. I took a deep breath, gripped the door handle, and rolled the window down 2 inches. Just enough to hear, just enough to speak. Yeah, I said, my voice gravelly from sleep and disuse. What do you want? The woman stepped closer into the light. She wasn't a cop. She was dressed in a sharp gray pantsuit that probably cost more than my car. She had a thick wool coat draped over her shoulders, and she was holding a leather briefcase. Her hair was pulled back in a tight professional bun. She looked like she had just walked out of a boardroom, not a parking lot. Mr. Warren Hensley. She asked, her breath misting in the air. Who is asking? I replied, defensive. My name is Catherine Vance, she said. I am an attorney with the firm Vance and Associates. I have been looking for you for 3 weeks. I let out a bitter laugh. If you are here to serve me more papers from the Halstead family, you can save the postage. I don't have anything left to take unless they want the spare tire. Catherine Vance didn't laugh. She didn't even smile. Her expression was serious, almost intense. She looked past me into the back seat where Leo was sleeping. Her eyes softened for a fraction of a second, then snapped back to me with a steeliness that surprised me. I do not work for the Halsteads, Mr. Hensley, she said. In fact, my client has spent a considerable amount of money ensuring the Halsteads do not know I am here. I frowned. What are you talking about? She held up a manila folder. Can I come in? It is freezing out here, and what I have to show you cannot be discussed through a crack in a window. I looked at her, and I looked at the folder. My gut told me to drive away, but my curiosity and the freezing cold that was seeping into my bones told me to wait. I unlocked the door. She walked around to the passenger side and slid in. The car dipped slightly under her weight. She brought with her the smell of expensive coffee and old paper. She closed the door and shivered, rubbing her gloved hands together. Thank you, she said. I didn't answer. I just watched her. She clicked open her briefcase and pulled out a stack of documents. She turned on the dome light. The sudden brightness made me squint. Mr. Hensley. She began opening the file. How long have you been living in this car? 6 months, I said, not hiding the shame. She nodded slowly as if confirming a calculation. And in those 6 months, has anyone from the estate of Martha Hensley contacted you regarding the property at 402 Oak Street? I shook my head. I don't know what that is, Martha didn't own any property. Victoria told me everything was gone. Catherine looked at me. It was a look of profound pity mixed with a simmering anger, not at me, but for me. She handed me a document. It was a deed, a property deed. It had a gold seal at the bottom and a signature I recognized instantly. Martha Hensley. The date on this deed is 20 years ago, Catherine said, pointing to the line. Martha bought an apartment building, 12 units brick construction. It is located 2 miles from where we are sitting right now. She bought it under her maiden name so the Halsteads wouldn't know. She wanted a safety net for you. For Leo. I stared at the paper. The letters swam before my eyes. A building. Martha had a building. I don't understand, I whispered. If she had this, why are we here? Because, Catherine said, her voice dropping an octave, becoming dangerous. Victoria Halstead filed an affidavit claiming you were missing and mentally incompetent the week after the funeral. She appointed herself as the temporary trustee of this asset. For the last 6 months, she has been collecting the rent. My mouth went dry. How much? I croaked. Catherine flipped to the next page, a bank statement. The numbers were black and bold. The building is fully occupied. As Mr. Hensley, she said. It generates $25,000 a month in net profit. That money has been going into an account controlled by Victoria. $25,000. I looked at the $7 in my cup holder. I looked at my son shivering in the back seat. I felt like the world was tilting on its axis. She stole it. I said, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. She stole everything while we froze. Yes, Catherine said, but that ends tonight. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a set of keys. They jingled a bright metallic sound in the quiet car. She placed them in my rough, dirty palm. This is the master key to the building, she said. And this is the key to the penthouse unit. It is vacant. It is furnished. It has heat. It has hot water, and it belongs to you. I gripped the keys so hard they dug into my skin. Tears welled up in my eyes, hot and fast. I couldn't stop them. Why? I asked, my voice breaking. Why are you helping me if you don't work for the Halsteads? Who do you work for? Catherine closed the folder. Her expression shifted. The professional mask slipped, revealing something urgent. I am helping you because it is my job, she said. But I am here at 2 o'clock in the morning because my employer is running out of time. He has been watching the Halsteads for a long time. He knows what they did to you, and he knows what you did for him 40 years ago. For him, I wiped my eyes. I don't know any billionaires. You do, she said. You just haven't seen him since you were a young man. His name is Preston Galloway, and he has a condition for his help. She paused, looking deep into my eyes, making sure I heard every word. He is dying, Warren, and he refuses to sign his final will and testament until he looks you in the eye. I sat there stunned. Preston Galloway, the real estate mogul, the man who owned half the city. I remembered a young man with big dreams and empty pockets who I helped fix a foundation for back in the 80s. I had forgotten about him, but clearly he hadn't forgotten me. So, Catherine said, putting her hand on the door handle, the question is, Mr. Hensley, why are you still sleeping in this car when you own a building down the street? I looked at the keys in my hand. Then I looked at the rearview mirror. Leo shifted in his sleep, murmuring something about trains. I turned the ignition. The engine roared to life louder this time. Or maybe that was just the blood rushing in my ears. Buckle up, I whispered to the empty air. We are going home. The building was called The Oaks. It was a sturdy 4-story brick structure that took up half a block on a quiet tree-lined street. As a builder, I know good bones when I see them. The mortar work was impeccable, the foundation solid, the kind of place built to last 100 years. I had driven past this building 1,000 times in my life, admiring its craftsmanship, never once suspecting that my name was on the deed. Catherine Vance pulled her luxury sedan into the underground garage. The gate rolled up with a smooth, expensive hum, a sound so different from the rattling muffler of my car that it felt like entering a different dimension. Leo was wide awake now. He pressed his face against the glass, his eyes wide as we drove past rows of parked cars that weren't covered in frost. We took the elevator to the top floor. When the doors opened, I hesitated. The hallway was carpeted warm and smelled of lavender and lemon polish. It smelled like a home. Catherine unlocked the door at the end of the hall and pushed it open. Go on, Mr. Hensley, she said softly. It is yours. I stepped inside. The penthouse was spacious with hardwood floors that gleamed under the recessed lighting. There was a fireplace in the living room, a large leather sofa, and a kitchen with granite countertops. But I didn't care about the luxury. I cared about the thermostat on the wall. It read 72 degrees. I walked over to it and just touched the plastic casing, feeling the vibration of the furnace working somewhere in the building. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever felt. As I said, my voice thick with emotion. Look, Leo walked to the middle of the room and just stood there. He took off his dirty knit cap and looked at the ceiling. Then he looked at the bathroom door. "Dad," he whispered, "can I go?" "Yes," I said. "Use all the hot water you want." He disappeared into the bathroom. A moment later, I heard the rush of the shower. I stood there listening to the water running, and for the first time in 6 months, my shoulders dropped. The constant grinding tension of survival began to ease, replaced by a strange hollow exhaustion. I walked over to the sofa and sat down, careful not to get dirt on the leather. Catherine sat in the armchair opposite me. She placed the file on the coffee table. She waited until I was ready. She waited until the sound of Leo singing in the shower drifted into the living room. It was a song his mother used to sing to him. Hearing it broke me a little more, but in a good way. It meant he felt safe. "Okay," I said, turning my gaze to the lawyer. "Tell me everything. How did Martha afford this? We lived in a modest house. We saved, but we never had this kind of money." Catherine opened the file and spread out a series of documents. "Martha inherited a small sum from an aunt in 1999, Catherine explained. "Instead of putting it in the joint account, she made a shrewd investment. She bought this building when the neighborhood was still up and coming. She hired a management company to run it and put every penny of profit back into the mortgage. By the time she got sick, the building was paid off." "But why hide it?" I asked, feeling a pang of hurt. "Why didn't she tell me?" Catherine pointed to a letter in the file. It was Martha's handwriting. I recognized the loop of her L's and the sharp cross of her T's. "Because she knew the construction business is volatile, Hal," Catherine said gently. "She saw how stressed you were during the recessions. She wanted this to be the lifeboat, the break in case of emergency. She was going to tell you on your 70th birthday. That was the plan." I rubbed my face with my rough hands. My 70th birthday was 3 weeks after she died, so the lifeboat was here the whole time. I said, "While we were drowning." "Yes," Catherine said. "And that brings us to Victoria Halstead." The air in the room seemed to get colder despite the furnace. Catherine pulled out a second stack of papers. These were bank statements, recent ones. When Martha went into the coma, Victoria used her power of attorney to access Martha's safe deposit box. She found the deed. She found the management contracts. She knew exactly what this building was worth. I looked at the statements. The numbers were staggering. $25,000 a month in rental income every single month. "See this account?" Catherine pointed to the recipient line. "The Halstead Family Trust." I squinted at the paper. My vision was blurry, but I saw it. July, August, September, October, November, December. 6 transfers, $150,000. "She told me there was nothing," I said, my voice trembling. "She stood at the funeral and told me Martha died penniless. She told me the bank took the house." "The house foreclosure was real, unfortunately," Catherine clarified. "Martha had leveraged the house to pay for experimental treatments at the end. But this building, this was separate. It was protected. Victoria knew that if you knew about this, you would have the resources to fight her. You would have the money to hire lawyers to keep custody of Leo, to maintain your dignity. So she lied. It was worse than a lie, Mr. Hensley." Catherine leaned forward, her eyes hard. "Victoria filed documents with the court, claiming you had suffered a mental breakdown after your wife's death. She claimed you had disappeared. She petitioned the court to be the temporary guardian of this asset until you could be located." "Oh, located." I slammed my hand on the table. I was sleeping in a car 2 miles away. She knew exactly where I was. Charles saw me tonight. He threw $20 at me like I was a dog. "That creates the paper trail she needs," Catherine said. "By claiming you are incompetent and missing, she justifies moving the funds into her control to protect the asset. She has been using this money to pay off the debts of Halstead Construction. Your money, Hal, your son's money. It is paying for the gas in Charles's Mercedes." I stood up. I couldn't sit anymore. I walked to the window and looked out at the city lights. I thought about the nights I held Leo while he shivered. I thought about the hunger cramps. I thought about the humiliation of washing our faces in gas station bathrooms. Every single moment of that suffering was unnecessary. It was manufactured. It was a choice Victoria made. She didn't just steal my money, I said, my voice low and dangerous. She stole my time with my son. She stole my grief. She made me think I was a failure because I couldn't provide, when all along she was robbing us blind. Leo came out of the bathroom then. He was wearing clean pajamas we found in the dresser. His hair was wet and combed. He looked younger. He looked like himself again. "Dad," he said, smiling, "the bed is so soft. It is like a cloud." I turned away so he wouldn't see the look on my face. It wasn't sadness anymore. It was something else. It was the cold, hard set of concrete setting in a mold. "I go to sleep, Leo," I said. "You are safe here." He went into the bedroom and closed the door. I turned back to Catherine. I picked up the bank statement. I looked at the name Halstead, printed next to my money. My hands were not shaking anymore. They were steady. They were the hands of a man who used to swing a sledgehammer for a living. "You said your boss wants to see me," I said to Catherine. "You said he hates the Halsteads." "He does," Catherine nodded. "And you said he is dying." "He is." I folded the bank statement and put it in my pocket. It felt heavy like a weapon. "Take me to him," I said. "If he wants to take down the Halsteads, he doesn't need to ask me twice. I don't just want my building back, Miss Vance. I want to tear their whole world down brick by brick." Catherine smiled for the first time. It was a sharp, predatory smile. "Grab your coat, Mr. Hensley," she said. "The night is still young." The morning sun hit the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse with a brightness that felt almost aggressive. For the first time in 6 months, I woke up without the ache in my lower back that comes from sleeping in a bucket seat. I woke up to the smell of brewing coffee and the sound of Leo laughing at a cartoon on a television that was bigger than the windshield of my car. Catherine Vance was already in the kitchen tapping furiously on her tablet. She looked up as I entered, sliding a porcelain cup toward me. "Drink up, Mr. Hensley," she said. "We have an appointment in 40 minutes. And wear the suit I hung in the closet. It is a little out of style, but it is clean." I showered and shaved the gray stubble off my face. The man staring back at me in the mirror looked different than the one I had seen in the gas station restroom yesterday. He looked tired, yes, but he didn't look defeated. The suit was a charcoal gray wool, a bit tight in the shoulders, but it made me stand straighter. I told Leo to stay with the housekeeper Catherine had arranged. He was too happy eating pancakes to mind. I kissed his forehead and followed Catherine to the elevator. The drive took us out of the city, past the suburbs, and into the rolling hills where the houses had names instead of numbers. We pulled up to a wrought iron gate that looked like the entrance to a fortress. A security guard checked our IDs and waved us through. The driveway wound through acres of manicured lawn, ending at a limestone mansion that looked more like a museum than a home. But as we got closer, I saw the cracks. I saw the ivy overgrowing the windows. I saw the fountain that had been dry for years. It was a house that was dying along with its owner. We were ushered into a library on the first floor that had been converted into a medical suite. The air smelled of antiseptic and old paper. Monitors beeped in a steady rhythmic cadence. In the center of the room, dwarfed by a massive hospital bed, lay Preston Galloway. I remembered him as a shark, a man who could walk into a construction site and make seasoned foremen sweat with a single glance. Now he looked like a bird. His skin was translucent, stretched tight over fragile bones. A clear tube ran under his nose, connecting him to a hissing oxygen tank. But when he opened his eyes, the shark was still there. His gaze locked onto me, sharp and calculating. Catherine stepped forward. "Mr. Galloway, this is Warren Hensley." Preston raised a trembling hand, signaling the nurse to adjust his bed. The motor whirred, lifting him into a sitting position. He took a shallow breath and pulled the mask away from his face. "Hey, you look terrible, Hensley." He wheezed. His voice was like dry leaves scraping together. I stood my ground, holding my hat in my hands. "You don't look like you are winning any beauty pageants yourself, Mr. Galloway." A dry hacking sound erupted from his chest. It took me a moment to realize he was laughing. Catherine looked nervous, but Preston waved her off. "I like him," he said. "He hasn't changed. Still has that stubborn jaw." He looked at me, his eyes narrowing. "Do you know why you are here, Hal?" "Because your lawyer pulled me out of a frozen car," I said. Preston shook his head slowly. "You are here because of the foundation at the Monolithic Tower Project, 1982. Do you remember it?" I nodded. How could I forget it was the job that almost bankrupted me? "I was the general contractor," I said. "We hit a pocket of soft clay halfway through the dig. The engineers said we needed to go 10 feet deeper and use a higher grade of concrete." Preston closed his eyes, remembering. "Yes, and every other contractor told me to just pour over it." They said no one would know. They said it would save me $2 million. They said the building would probably stand up fine. Probably, I repeated. I told you I would not put my name on a building that might fall down. I told you I would eat the cost of the extra digging if you paid for the materials. And you did, Preston whispered. You lost your profit margin for the entire year to do the job right. You were the only one who didn't try to steal from me, the only one who cared more about the work than the check. He opened his eyes again, and the intensity in them was frightening. I am dying, Hal. The doctors give me a week, maybe 2, and the vultures are circling. He pointed a bony finger at a stack of documents on his bedside table. The Halstead Group. Your in-laws, they have been trying to buy my company for a decade. They want my land. They want my permits. But mostly they want to strip my assets to cover their own debts. Charles Halstead is a fool and a thief. If he gets control of Galloway Industries, he will fire 5,000 people and sell the machinery for scrap within a month. I listened, feeling a cold knot form in my stomach at the mention of the Halsteads. What can I do? I asked. I am just a retired builder with $7 in his pocket. I don't need money. Preston coughed again, grimacing in pain. I have plenty of that. I need a proxy. Catherine stepped in to explain. Mr. Galloway owns 51% of the voting shares in his company. When he passes, those shares go into a trust. He needs to appoint a trustee to manage those votes for a period of 5 years. Someone who cannot be bought. Someone who cannot be intimidated. Someone who knows a bad foundation when he sees one. He wants you, Hal, Catherine said. I looked from her to the dying man in the bed. You want me to run a billion-dollar company? No, Preston said. I have a board of directors to run the business. I need you to hold the leash. You will have the power to veto any merger, any acquisition, and any sale of assets, specifically any sale to the Halstead Group. You will be the wall they cannot climb. And in exchange, I asked. In exchange? Preston said, his voice dropping to a whisper. You get a salary of $50,000 a month, and when the 5-year trust expires, you get 10% of the company's stock. You will never have to sleep in a car again. You will never have to worry about your son's medical bills. You can burn Charles Halstead's world to the ground, and you can do it from the comfort of my boardroom. The offer hung in the air. It was too big to comprehend. It was a lifeline thrown to a drowning man, but it was also a loaded gun. Preston wasn't just asking me to work for him. He was asking me to go to war. I looked at my hands. The calluses were still there. The dirt was gone, but the history wasn't. I thought about Charles throwing that $20 bill on the floor. I thought about Victoria stealing the rent money. I will do it, I said. Preston let out a long breath, his shoulders relaxing against the pillows. Good. Catherine has the papers. Sign them now before the morphine kicks in and I lose my head. I reached for the pen Catherine was holding out. My hand hovered over the signature line. This was it, the point of no return. Suddenly a shrill ringtone shattered the quiet of the room. It was Catherine's phone. She frowned, checking the screen. I have to take this, she said. It is my associate at the courthouse. She stepped into the hallway. I waited, pen in hand. Preston watched me, his breathing labored. Do not hesitate, Hal, he wheezed. Hesitation is where the cracks start. I was about to touch the pen to the paper when Catherine burst back into the room. Her face was pale, her composure gone. Stop, she said, breathless. I looked up. What is it? We have a problem, she said, her voice tight. A big one? My associate just saw Victoria Halstead filing an emergency motion at the probate court. So, I said, let her file. We have the deed. It is not about the deed, Hal. Catherine looked at me with genuine fear in her eyes. Someone at the bank tipped her off. She knows you accessed the penthouse. She knows you are meeting with Preston. Preston tried to sit up, the monitors beeping faster. What is she doing? He rasped. Catherine swallowed hard. She is not filing for the money, Hal. She is filing for emergency custody of Leo. She claims you are mentally unstable and that you have kidnapped a vulnerable adult. The police are on their way to the apartment right now. The pen dropped from my hand. It hit the floor with a sound like a gunshot. Leo, I whispered. He is alone with the housekeeper, Catherine said. If the police get there before we do, they will hand him over to social services. And since Victoria is the next of kin, she will take him. I finished at the blood draining from my face. She will take him to get to me. I didn't look at Preston. I didn't look at the contract that could make me a millionaire. I turned and ran. I ran out of the library, out of the mansion, and toward the car. I had to get to my son. The war hadn't just started. The enemy had already breached the gates. I drove back to the apartment doing 80 miles an hour on the expressway. My heart was hammering against my ribs. But when I burst through the door of the penthouse, the silence that greeted me was the most terrifying sound of all. I expected police. I expected social workers dragging my son away. Instead, I found Leo sitting on the living room rug, building a tower out of plastic blocks the housekeeper had found for him. He looked up and smiled, completely unaware that his father had just signed a contract with a dying billionaire and was currently fleeing a custody battle. I sent the housekeeper home and double-locked the door. I paced the floor waiting for the inevitable pounding of fists against wood. It came 20 minutes later, but it wasn't the heavy thud of a police baton. It was the melodic, polite chime of the doorbell. I checked the security camera feed on the wall panel. It was not the police. It was Victoria and Charles Halstead, and they were smiling. I stared at the screen. 10 hours ago, Charles had thrown $20 at my feet and called my son a slur. 6 months ago, Victoria had told me I was dead to her. Now they were standing in the hallway of my building, holding a wicker basket wrapped in gold cellophane. The audacity of it took my breath away. I took a moment to compose myself. I smoothed down the front of the suit Catherine had given me, took a deep breath, and opened the door. Hal. Victoria gasped, her hand flying to her chest in a gesture that was so theatrical it belonged on a stage. Thank God you are here. We have been so worried about you. She pushed past me before I could invite her in. She wasn't wearing the severe black she wore at the funeral. She was wearing a soft powder blue coat that made her look harmless, maternal even. Charles followed her, carrying the basket. He didn't look at the floor this time. He looked at the high ceilings, the crown molding, and the expensive art on the walls. I saw the greed flash in his eyes before he masked it with a tight salesman grin. "We brought you something," Charles said, setting the basket on the granite island in the kitchen. "Just a housewarming gift. Some aged cheddar, a bottle of wine, those truffles you used to like at Christmas." I looked at the basket. It probably cost $500. That was 2 months of food for me and Leo. "What do you want, Victoria?" I asked, keeping my voice flat. "I am assuming you didn't come here to discuss cheese." Victoria turned to me, her eyes glistening with tears that I knew she could summon on command. She reached out to touch my arm, but I took a step back. She let her hand fall, looking wounded. "We came to apologize, Hal," she said softly. "We acted poorly last night, but you have to understand we were in shock. Seeing you in that state, living like that, it broke my heart." "It didn't look like your heart was breaking," I said. "It looked like you were afraid I would ask for a ride." "That is not fair." Victoria sniffed, pulling a silk handkerchief from her purse. "I know you are angry about the money, about the rent from this building, but you have to let me explain." She walked over to the window, looking out at the city, creating a silhouette of a burdened woman. "I didn't steal it, Hal," she said, turning back to me with wide, pleading eyes. "I was protecting it. I was protecting you. When Martha died, you were a wreck. You were not sleeping. You were forgetting things. I was terrified that grief would make you do something rash. I was afraid scammers would target you if they knew you had this kind of income. So you decided the best way to protect me was to let me sleep in a Honda Civic in freezing temperatures?" I asked. "I didn't know it had gotten that bad." She lied. The lie was smooth, practiced. "I thought you were staying with friends. I put that money in a separate account, Hal, a holding account. I was going to give it all to you the moment you were back on your feet, the moment you were mentally stable again." I watched her performance. If I hadn't heard her on the recording yesterday, laughing about waiting for me to die, I might have believed her. She was good. She was terrifyingly good. "And now," I asked, "do I look stable enough for you now?" Charles stepped forward, sensing the opening. "Of course you do, old boy. You look great. That suit fits you well, and that is actually why we are here to help you manage this transition." He walked over to the kitchen island and leaned against it, trying to look casual. "Word on the street is that you had a meeting with Preston Galloway this morning," Charles said. "News travels fast," I replied. Charles chuckled, but his eyes were cold. "It is a small town, Hal. Listen, Preston is a shark. He eats people like you for breakfast. We heard he offered you a position, a proxy role. I didn't confirm or deny it. I just waited. Look," Charles continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "We know you are a great builder. You know bricks, you know drywall. But corporate finance, voting shares, mergers, that is a different language. Preston is using you, Hal. He is setting you up to take the fall for his messy estate." So what do you suggest? I asked. Victoria stepped in, closing the distance between us. Let Charles help you, Hal. He can act as your advisor. You can officially hold the proxy, but Charles will do the heavy lifting. He will tell you how to vote. He will handle the paperwork. You just sign where he tells you collect your salary and enjoy your life with Leo. You can take trips. You can get Leo the best doctors. You don't want to spend your twilight years fighting boardroom battles, do you? I looked at them. The wolf and the snake dressed in designer clothes standing in my living room. They didn't want to help me. They wanted to neutralize me. They wanted to control Preston's company through me. And if I said no, I knew the next step wouldn't be a gift basket. It would be the police. I needed time. I needed them to leave so I could plan. I rubbed my chin, feigning exhaustion. It is a lot to take in, I said slowly. I am tired, Victoria. It has been a long 6 months. Of course, Victoria cooed. You need rest. Just think about it, Hal. We are family. We are the only ones who truly care about Leo's future. She let that threat hang in the air. Leo's future. I will think about it, I said. Give me a day. Charles clapped his hands together. That is all we ask, smart man. They moved toward the door. Victoria stopped and looked at Leo, who was still playing with his blocks. Goodbye, Leo, she called out. Auntie Victoria will see you very soon. Leo didn't look up. He has good instincts. I closed the door behind them. I locked the deadbolt. I leaned my forehead against the cool wood and let out a breath I felt like I had been holding for 20 minutes. My hands were shaking again, but this time it wasn't from fear. It was from the effort of not strangling them. I walked back to the kitchen island. The gift basket sat there wrapped in its golden bow, shining under the expensive lights. It was beautiful. It was expensive. And it was poison. I picked it up. It was heavy. I walked over to the stainless steel trash compactor in the corner of the kitchen. I didn't unwrap it. I didn't save the wine. I didn't save the cheese. I shoved the entire basket bow and all into the bin. I pressed the button. The machine groaned and crunched. The sound of breaking glass and snapping wicker filled the kitchen. I watched until the basket was nothing but a flattened disk of garbage. I am not a bricklayer anymore, Charles, I said to the empty room. I am the demolition man, and I am just getting started. The silence in the penthouse after I crushed the gift basket was heavy, but it wasn't empty. My years in construction taught me that a room always speaks if you know how to listen. Buildings settle, pipes expand, vents rattle. But there was something else in the air, a prickling sensation on the back of my neck that I hadn't felt since my days working on high-security government contracts. Victoria Halstead didn't just leave a gift basket because she was feeling generous. She left it as a distraction. The way she had moved around the room touching the furniture leaning against the island, it was too deliberate. She was marking territory. I looked at Leo. He was back to building his tower, humming softly. I put a finger to my lips, signaling him to be quiet. He paused, holding a blue block in midair, his eyes wide with confusion. I winked at him, trying to turn it into a game, a continuation of our secret patrol. I walked over to the television and turned up the volume on the cartoon. Then I began to sweep the room. I started with the obvious places. I ran my hand under the granite countertop of the kitchen island. Nothing. I checked behind the sofa cushions where Charles had been standing. Nothing. I moved to the coffee table in the center of the living room, the one Victoria had rested her purse on for a brief moment while she cried those crocodile tears. I knelt down, pretending to tie my shoe, and felt along the underside of the wood. My fingers brushed against something cool and plastic. It was small, no bigger than a matchbox, held in place by a strip of double-sided tape. A listening device, high quality too. The red light wasn't blinking, which meant it was voice-activated and likely transmitting in real time. She hadn't just come to threaten me. She had come to spy on me. She wanted to know if I was going to take Preston's offer. She wanted to catch me slipping up, saying something angry or confused that she could use in court to prove I was unstable. My first instinct was to rip it off and smash it under my heel, just like I had done with the basket. But I stopped myself. If I destroyed it, she would know I found it. She would know I was onto her game. And right now my biggest advantage was that she thought I was a senile, broken old man. I looked at the device and smiled. You want to hear me, Victoria? Fine. I will give you a show. I stood up and walked over to Leo. I grabbed a notepad and a pen from the counter. I wrote in big block letters, "Do not talk, just nod." Leo nodded, his face serious. He loved games. I took a deep breath and pitched my voice loud and clear, aiming it right at the coffee table. Leo, I said, sounding defeated. I have been thinking about what your Aunt Victoria said. I paused for effect. shuffling my feet on the hardwood floor to sound agitated. Maybe she is right, son. Look at this place. It is too much for us. I am 70 years old. I can't run a building. I can't manage money. I can barely remember where I put my glasses half the time. I winked at Leo. He covered his mouth to stop a giggle. I think I am going to sign those papers tomorrow. I continued injecting a tremor into my voice. Charles knows about business. He can take care of the stocks. He can take care of the money. We will just take a small allowance and maybe go to Florida. Yeah, Florida sounds nice. No more fighting. I am just so tired of fighting. And I let out a long, ragged sigh that would have won me an Oscar. I am going to go lie down for a bit. Leo, you watch your show. We will call Aunt Victoria in the morning and tell her the good news. I walked heavily toward the hallway, making sure my footsteps were audible. But instead of going to the bedroom, I bypassed it completely. I motioned for Leo to keep watching TV. I slipped into the coat closet near the entrance, grabbed my old jacket, and quietly opened the front door. I didn't close it all the way, leaving it just a hair ajar so it wouldn't click and alert the bug. I took the stairs down instead of the elevator. I didn't want to leave a digital trail. My destination wasn't the lobby, but the basement, the mechanical room. It was the heart of the building, noisy with the hum of boilers and the rush of water pumps. It was the one place in the building where no listening device could pick up a conversation over the industrial din. Catherine Vance was already there waiting by the service entrance as we had arranged via text message earlier. She looked out of place in the dusty basement in her tailored suit, but she didn't seem to care. She was pacing, checking her watch. "You found it?" she asked as soon as she saw me. "Under the coffee table," I said, brushing dust off my sleeve. I gave her an earful. By now she is probably opening a bottle of champagne to celebrate my surrender. Catherine let out a sharp breath. "Good. That buys us about 12 hours. But we have a bigger problem, Hal. The motion she filed for emergency custody isn't just a threat. It is on the docket for tomorrow morning. She is going to argue that you are a flight risk and a danger to Leo." "Let her argue," I said, my voice hard. "I have the deed. I have the lease." "That is civil court," Catherine cut in. "This is family court. The burden of proof is different. She has witnesses, Hal. She has paid off people to say they saw you acting erratically. She has a doctor willing to testify that your time on the streets caused acute cognitive decline. If the judge believes her even for a second, they will put Leo in temporary state care while they evaluate you. Temporary could mean months." I felt the blood drain from my face. State care. I knew what that meant. A crowded facility stranger's medication to keep him quiet. Leo wouldn't survive a week in a place like that without shutting down completely. "We can't let that happen," I said. "We won't," Catherine said, "but we need more than just a defense. We need an offense. We need to prove that she is unfit. We need to prove that her interest in Leo is purely financial." I thought about the last 6 months. I thought about the trust fund she claimed to set up. "I need to get into her books," I said. "Not the ones she shows the IRS, the real ones." Catherine shook her head. "That is impossible. The Halsteads have forensic accountants who bury everything. Unless you have a warrant, which we don't, we can't touch their records." "I don't need a warrant," I said, a plan forming in my mind. "I need a blueprint." Catherine looked at me confused. "A blueprint? I built the Halstead headquarters." I said 20 years ago. Charles wanted a private office that was completely soundproof. He was paranoid even then. He had me install a wall safe behind the mahogany paneling, but he was cheap. He didn't want to pay for the high-end digital lock. He made me install a mechanical one, an old Yale model. "So?" Catherine asked. "So?" I grinned a cold, humorless grin. "I didn't just install it, I set the combination. And Charles is a creature of habit. He uses the same numbers for everything. His birthday, his wedding anniversary, and the day he took over the company." "You want to break into the Halstead headquarters?" Catherine whispered, looking around the basement as if the boilers were listening. "Hal, that is breaking and entering. That is a felony. If you get caught, you go to prison, and Victoria wins everything by default." "I am not going to break in," I corrected her. "I am going to inspect the structural integrity of a building I constructed. I still have my master keys, Catherine. I never threw them away. A builder always keeps a set in case of emergencies." "This isn't a leaky pipe, Hal." "No," I said. "It is a rot and I'm going to cut it out. I need you to keep Victoria busy tomorrow morning," I instructed her. "Delay the hearing. File a motion for a continuance. Tell them I am sick. Tell them anything. Just keep her in that courtroom until noon." "And where will you be?" she asked. I will be in Charles's office looking for the ledger that proves they have been robbing my son blind. Catherine stared at me for a long moment. She was a lawyer. Her job was to follow the law, but she was also human. She saw the desperation in my eyes, and she saw the fire. She reached into her briefcase and pulled out a small, high-definition camera. If you are going to do this, she said, handing it to me, don't just look at the ledger. Photograph every single page. And how? I paused at the door. Be careful. The Halsteads don't just have lawyers. They have security, and they are not as polite as I am. I pocketed the camera. I spent 6 months sleeping with one eye open in a parking lot, Catherine. I know how to move in the dark. I walked back up the stairs, my heart pounding with a rhythm that was equal parts fear and exhilaration. I wasn't just defending myself anymore. I was going to war. And as I slipped back into the apartment, whispering a thank you to the silent walls, I knew that tonight would be the longest night of my life. But for the first time in a long time, I wasn't waiting for the sun to rise. I was waiting to bring the storm. I thought I had time. I thought my performance the night before, the tired old man ready to sign away his life, had bought me a 24-hour head start. I sat at the kitchen island drinking coffee, watching Leo eat his toast with the carefree joy that only he possessed. We were safe, or so I believed. I was mentally rehearsing how I would sneak into the Halstead headquarters later that day. I was thinking about lock combinations and floor plans. I was thinking like a builder. I should have been thinking like a prey animal, because while I was planning a heist, Victoria Halstead was planning an ambush. It didn't start with a phone call. It started with a heavy rhythmic pounding on the front door that shook the frame. It was the kind of knock that doesn't ask for permission. It demands compliance. Leo dropped his toast, his eyes going wide with panic. He hates loud noises. It reminds him of the accident. I stood up, my heart instantly hammering a warning rhythm against my ribs. I walked to the door, checking the monitor. My blood ran cold. It wasn't just Victoria. Standing next to her were 2 uniformed police officers and a woman in a navy blue windbreaker holding a clipboard. The windbreaker had letters on the back that I couldn't see, but I knew what they meant. Adult Protective Services. I didn't open the door. I backed away, but they didn't wait. Mr. Hensley, a male voice boomed through the wood. This is the police. Open the door or we will be forced to breach. We have a court order. I looked at Leo. He was covering his ears, rocking back and forth in his chair. Dad, he whimpered. Dad, make it stop. I had no choice. If they broke the door down, it would only traumatize Leo more. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the door open. The hallway was filled with people, but the only face I saw was hers. Victoria stood behind the officers, her face a mask of tragic concern. She wasn't smiling today. She was playing the role of the terrified aunt to perfection. Hal, she cried out, her voice trembling. Thank God he is alive. I ignored her. I looked at the lead officer, a tall man with a buzz cut and eyes that held zero sympathy. What is this? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Why are you banging on my door like I am a criminal? Sir, the woman with the clipboard stepped forward. I am Janet Ross with Adult Protective Services. We have received credible reports regarding the immediate safety of a vulnerable adult, Leo Hensley. We have an emergency removal order signed by a judge this morning. Removal. I stepped into the doorway, blocking their path. You are not removing anyone. This is my son. He is fine. Look at him. He is eating breakfast. Miss Ross didn't look at Leo. She looked at her paperwork. Mr. Hensley, we have sworn affidavits stating that for the last 6 months, you have forced your son to live in a vehicle without adequate heat sanitation or nutrition. We have medical reports suggesting he is suffering from malnutrition and exposure. And we have testimony that your mental state has deteriorated to the point where you are a danger to yourself and him. I looked at Victoria. This was her move. She took the very suffering she inflicted on us and weaponized it. She starved us, and now she was calling the police because we were hungry. That is a lie, I said, pointing a shaking finger at Victoria. We were in that car because she stole our money. She controls the trust. She is the reason we were homeless. The officer stepped in his hand, resting near his belt. Sir, that is a civil matter. We are here to execute a protective order. You need to step aside. I am not stepping aside, I said, planting my feet. He is my son. He is scared. If you touch him, you will hurt him. Victoria spoke up, then her voice dripping with poison disguised as honey. Officer, please. You see how aggressive he is? He has been like this since my sister died. He is paranoid. He thinks everyone is stealing from him. I just want my nephew safe. Look at the boy. He is terrified of his own father. She pointed at Leo. Leo was rocking faster now, making a low keening sound. He does that when he is overwhelmed. But to these strangers, to these people who didn't know him, it looked like fear. It looked like he was afraid of me. "See?" Ms. Ross said. "He is in distress. Officers, secure the father. I need to get the subject." The two officers moved instantly. One grabbed my left arm, the other my right. They were strong, younger than me by 30 years. I struggled digging my heels into the hardwood floor. "No," I shouted. "Leo, it is okay. Daddy is here." "Sir, stop resisting or you will be arrested." The officer growled in my ear, twisting my arm behind my back. Miss Ross walked past me straight into the kitchen. She approached Leo briskly like she was collecting a package. "Leo," she said loudly, "come with me. We are going to a safe place." Leo looked up, his eyes wild. He saw me being held by the police. He saw a stranger reaching for him. He did the only thing he knew how to do. He screamed, "No, no, no, Daddy." He scrambled backward, knocking over the chair. He curled into a ball in the corner of the kitchen, covering his head. "Don't touch him," I roared, struggling against the officers. "You are scaring him. He has a brain injury. You have to be gentle." Ms. Ross didn't listen. She grabbed Leo by the arm and pulled him up. He flailed his limbs, hitting the cabinets. He wasn't fighting her. He was panicking. But the more he panicked, the rougher she got. "Officer, I need assistance," she yelled. One of the cops holding me let go and rushed to help her. They grabbed my son, my gentle boy who loved trains and cartoons, and they dragged him across the floor like a criminal. Victoria stood in the doorway watching. For a split second our eyes met. She didn't look sad anymore. There was a cold, satisfied gleam in her eyes. She had found the one thing I cared about, more than money, more than justice, more than my own life, and she was taking it. "Hal, please don't make this harder," Victoria said loud enough for the police to hear. "It is for his own good. We will get him the help you couldn't provide." "You are a monster," I screamed, tears streaming down my face. "I will kill you for this." That was what she wanted, a threat, a verbal confirmation of my instability. The officer holding me slammed me against the wall. "That is enough," he shouted. "You are lucky we are not taking you in for assault, old man. Stay here. Do not follow us." I watched helplessly as they dragged Leo out the door. He was sobbing now, a broken guttural sound that tore my soul apart. He reached out a hand toward me, his fingers grasping at the air. "Daddy, Daddy, help." I pushed against the officer, but I was 70 years old and exhausted. I was weak. I slumped against the wall, sliding down until I hit the floor. "It is okay, Leo." I choked out, though. I knew he couldn't hear me anymore. "Daddy is coming. I promise." Miss Ross shoved Leo into the elevator. Victoria stepped in after them. The doors began to close. The last thing I saw was Leo's face pressed against the gap, his eyes filled with a terror that I knew would haunt me for the rest of my days. The doors shut. The apartment fell silent. The officer released me and stepped back, adjusting his uniform. "Stay put, Mr. Hensley," he said coldly. "There is a hearing in 3 days. Until then, you are to have no contact with the subject or the guardian." He walked out, leaving the door open. I sat on the floor of the penthouse that was supposed to be our sanctuary. It didn't feel like a home anymore. It felt like a tomb. I looked at the overturned chair in the kitchen. I looked at the half-eaten toast on the plate. I pulled my knees to my chest and wept. I wept for the fear in my son's eyes. I wept for my own weakness. I wept because I had played by the rules. I had tried to be smart, and they had crushed me anyway. But as the tears dried, something else took their place. A coldness, a stillness. I remembered the camera in my pocket. I remembered the keys to the Halstead headquarters. Victoria thought she had won. She thought that by taking Leo, she had broken me. She thought I would curl up and die of grief. She was wrong. She hadn't broken me. She had removed the only thing that was holding me back. I didn't have to worry about Leo's safety tonight. He was in the system now. He was gone, which meant I had nothing left to lose. I stood up. My joints popped. My back hurt. But I walked to the bathroom and splashed cold water on my face. I looked at myself in the mirror. The eyes staring back weren't the eyes of a father anymore. They were the eyes of a man who had nothing left but a mission. "You want to play dirty, Victoria?" I whispered to the empty room. I went to the closet and put on my old work boots. I put on my dark coat. I checked the battery on the camera. "You took my son," I said, locking the door behind me. "So I am going to take your world, and I am going to start with the very foundation you are standing on." The silence in the penthouse was different than the silence in the car. In the car, the silence was cold and tight, but it was shared. It was filled with the rhythm of Leo breathing the small sounds he made in his sleep. Here, in this sprawling apartment with its high ceilings and city views, the silence was a physical weight. It pressed against my eardrums. It screamed at me. I walked into the bedroom Leo had used for exactly one night. The bed was unmade. The pillow still held the indentation of his head. A small plastic train engine lay on the nightstand, left behind in the chaos. I picked it up. My hand engulfed the toy. I sank onto the edge of the bed, the mattress groaning under my weight. For a moment, just a moment, I allowed the darkness to wash over me. I was 70 years old. I was tired. I was fighting a billionaire family with infinite resources. Maybe Victoria was right. Maybe I was just a broken old man who had dragged his son down with him. The image of Leo screaming in that elevator played on a loop in my mind, a torture device of my own memory. I felt a sob rising in my chest, threatening to shatter me completely. But then I looked at the train in my hand. It was a sturdy thing built to last. Leo loved it because it didn't break when he dropped it. They broke him, I whispered to the empty room. The thought wasn't new, but the context had changed. For 10 years I had accepted Leo's accident as a tragedy, an act of God. A gust of wind, a loose bolt, a terrible stroke of bad luck on a construction site. We had settled for the insurance payout, which barely covered the first year of surgeries. We had signed the waivers because we were grieving and we trusted family. Charles had been so supportive back then, patting my back, telling me the company would take care of everything. But Charles didn't take care of anything. He stole the rent money. He let us starve. And if he was capable of doing that to his own nephew, what else was he capable of? My builder brain kicked into gear. I stopped thinking like a father and started thinking like a foreman. Accidents happen, yes, but catastrophic failures, beams falling from 4 stories up. Those don't just happen. Those are created. They are the result of decisions made weeks in advance. I stood up. The grief was still there, a heavy stone in my gut, but the fire was hotter. I went to the kitchen and grabbed my old phone. I scrolled through the contacts past the disconnected numbers of friends who had abandoned us, until I found a name I hadn't called in a decade. Joe Miller. Joe had been the site supervisor on the Halstead headquarters project. He was a good man, a stickler for rules. He was fired 2 days after Leo's accident. Charles had said it was because Joe was responsible for the safety lapse. I had believed him. I pressed the call button. It rang 4 times. I almost hung up thinking he might have changed his number, or, God forbid, passed away. But then a gruff voice answered. "Yeah." "Joe," I said. "It is Warren Hensley." There was a long silence on the other end, then a heavy sigh. "Hal, I heard about Martha. I am sorry. And I heard about you and the boy. I don't need sympathy, Joe," I said, cutting straight to the point. "I need to know about the steel beam." The line went dead silent. I could hear the faint sound of a television in the background. "Hal, don't," Joe said, his voice dropping. "It has been 10 years. Let it go." "I can't let it go, Joe. They took Leo today. They took him because they said I couldn't care for him. But I think they took him because they are afraid of what I might remember." I waited. I needed him to break. Joe, I continued pressing harder. "You were the safest foreman I ever knew. You measured twice, cut once. You never let a guy on a rig without a harness. So, how did a 2-ton beam come loose?" Whoa. I heard the clink of a bottle against a glass. Joe was drinking. "It wasn't me, Hal," he whispered. "I fought him on it. I swear to God I fought him." "Fought who?" "Charles." Joe spat the name out like a curse word. We were behind schedule, 2 weeks behind. The crane rental was costing $10,000 a day. Charles came to the site that morning. He was screaming about the budget. He told us to bypass the secondary bracing. He said it was overkill. He said the primary welds would hold for the lift. My hand gripped the phone so tight I thought the plastic would crack. Secondary bracing takes 4 hours to install. Charles crippled my son to save 4 hours of labor and 1 day of crane rental. I told him it was dangerous. Joe continued, his voice shaking. I told him the wind was picking up. He told me if I didn't give the order to lift, he would fire me on the spot and blacklist me from every site in Chicago. I had 3 kids in college, Hal. I was scared, so I gave the order. And then Leo walked under the drop zone to bring you your lunch. I closed my eyes. I could see it. The dust, the noise, the scream. "Do you have proof?" I asked. Joe let out a bitter laugh. Why do you think he fired me? He wanted me gone so he could shred the daily logs. He wiped the site clean before the OSHA inspectors got there. He blamed it on a faulty cable. So, there is nothing, I said, feeling the hope drain out of me. I didn't say that, Joe said. I said he shredded the office copies. But you know me, Hal. I am old school. I kept my own field diary. I wrote everything down. Every conversation, every order, every time Charles Halstead put a $sign over a human life. Where is it? I asked. I have kept it in a shoebox in my attic for 10 years, waiting for someone to ask, Joe said. I was too a coward to bring it to the police myself. He threatened my family, Hal. But if you were going to war, then I want to give you the ammunition. I met him an hour later at an all-night diner on the south side. Joe looked older, grayer, beaten down by life. He slid a battered water-stained notebook across the Formica table. I didn't open it immediately. I looked him in the eye. Thank you, I said. He looked at away shame written in the lines of his face. I should have given you this 10 years ago. Maybe Leo would have... Don't, I said. We can't fix the past, but we can make sure they don't have a future. I opened the book. The pages were yellowed, covered in the scratchy handwriting of a man writing in the wind. I turned to November 14th. There it was. 0800 hours. Charles Halstead on site. Ordered removal of secondary bracing on Sector 4. Cited budget overruns. I advised against. He overruled. Order confirmed verbally. And there at the bottom of the page was a scrawled set of initials next to a timestamp. R.S. Charles had signed the daily log. He was so arrogant, so sure of his power, that he had signed off on the safety check himself to speed things up. He had signed his own confession. I ran my finger over the ink. This wasn't just negligence. This was criminal. This was depraved indifference. This was the reason my son had the mind of a child. And Victoria knew. She had to know. That was why they were so desperate to control us. If I had ever looked into the accident, if I had ever sued this notebook, would have sent Charles to prison for 20 years. I closed the book and tucked it inside my coat right next to my heart. It felt warmer than the heater in the diner. I stood up and put a $50 bill on the table to cover Joe's coffee. It was money I had borrowed from Catherine, but soon I wouldn't need to borrow anything. Go home, Joe, I said, and lock your doors. When I drop this bomb, the shockwave is going to hit everyone. I walked out into the night air. The city looked different now. It wasn't a cold, hostile place where I was a victim. It was a construction site, and I had just found the structural flaw that would bring the whole thing crashing down. I had the deed, I had the lease, and now I had the smoking gun. I am coming for you, Leo, I whispered to the wind. And God help anyone who stands in my way. The Halstead estate looked like a fortress of light against the pitch-black sky. Expensive cars lined the circular driveway like a parade of vanity. Through the massive front windows, I could see shadows moving, dancing holding champagne flutes that caught the sparkle of the crystal chandeliers. They were having a party. Less than 12 hours after they had dragged my terrified son out of his home, Victoria Halstead was hosting a gala. The audacity of it made the blood pound in my ears hot and rhythmic. I stood in the tree line bordering the property, pulling my coat tighter against the wind. I wasn't Warren Hensley the victim tonight. I was Warren Hensley the builder, and I knew every brick, every wire, and every secret passage of this house because I was the one who renovated it for them 15 years ago. I skirted the edge of the lawn, sticking to the shadows of the hedges. The grass was wet and slick, muffling my footsteps. I didn't go to the front door. I didn't go to the back patio where caterers were busy passing trays of hors d'oeuvres. I went to the side of the garage. There was a small service door there, used mostly by the gardeners. I knelt down in the mud, my knees protesting, and looked at the keypad. It was an old model, the numbers faded from years of use. Charles was a creature of habit, but Victoria was arrogant. She believed she was untouchable, so she never bothered to update her security protocols. I punched in the code 1980 the year she graduated college. She was obsessed with her glory days. The light on the pad blinked red, then green. A soft click echoed in the night air. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding and slipped inside. The garage smelled of motor oil and expensive leather. I moved quickly past Charles's Mercedes, the same car bought with the money she stole from my son's future. I found the door leading into the mudroom and gently turned the handle. It was unlocked. The noise of the party washed over me as soon as I stepped into the house. Laughter, clinking glass, the low hum of jazz music. It was a sensory assault. I had to move fast. Victoria's home office was on the second floor at the end of the east wing. I knew the servants' staircase behind the kitchen would be busy with catering staff, so I took the risk of using the main hallway hugging the wall behind a large display case of antique vases. I felt like a ghost haunting the living, invisible to these people who looked right through anyone who wasn't wearing a tuxedo. I made it to the stairs and climbed, taking them two at a time, ignoring the burn in my thighs. At the top of the landing, I paused. The hallway was empty. I slipped into the office and closed the door softly behind me, engaging the lock. The room was dark, illuminated only by the moonlight filtering through the heavy velvet drapes. It smelled of Victoria's perfume, a cloying scent of roses that made my stomach turn. I didn't waste time looking through the desk drawers. Victoria was paranoid. She wouldn't leave incriminating documents where the cleaning lady could find them. I walked straight to the built-in bookshelf on the far wall. I remembered installing this unit. I remembered Victoria demanding a hidden compartment. Not for valuables, she had said, but for private correspondence. I knew exactly which panel was false. I reached behind the third shelf, feeling for the small latch I had recessed into the wood. My calloused fingertip found the groove. I pressed. The panel popped open with a satisfying mechanical thud. Behind it sat a small gray safe. I didn't have the combination for this one, but I didn't need it. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small, high-powered magnet I had grabbed from my toolbox before leaving the apartment. Cheap residential safes like this had a solenoid that could be tripped if you knew exactly where to place the magnet. It was a trick an old locksmith had taught me. I slid the magnet over the lock mechanism, feeling for the pull. Click. I turned the handle. The heavy steel door swung open. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness of the safe. There were stacks of cash rubber-banded in thick bundles, jewelry boxes, and right on top, a black leather ledger. I pulled it out and opened it on the desk. My hands shook, not from fear, but from rage. It was all there, 2 sets of books. One column was labeled The Oaks Official, showing maintenance costs that were inflated by 300%. The other column was labeled PS Personal, showing the actual cash flow transfers to offshore accounts payments for the Mercedes payments for the party happening downstairs. I pulled out the camera Catherine had given me. I started snapping photos, page after page. Evidence of tax fraud, evidence of embezzlement, evidence that she had robbed a mentally disabled man to fund her socialite lifestyle. I was on the last page when I heard it. The heavy thud of footsteps in the hallway, voices getting closer. I killed the flashlight and shoved the ledger back into the safe, but I didn't have time to close the panel. The doorknob rattled. "It is locked," a woman's voice said. It was Victoria. I dove behind the heavy velvet curtains near the window, pressing my back against the cold glass. The door clicked open. The lights flickered on. Through the small gap in the fabric, I saw Victoria stumble into the room, holding a wine glass. She was followed by a woman I didn't recognize, someone in a red dress who looked just as tipsy. "Why is it so dark in here?" the woman asked. Victoria laughed a harsh, ugly sound. "I like privacy, darling. Besides, I have to toast to my victory." She walked over to the desk, right where I had been standing seconds ago. She didn't notice the safe panel was slightly ajar. She was too drunk on power. "Oh, victory," the woman asked. "Did you close a big deal?" "The biggest," Victoria grinned, leaning back against the desk. "I finally got rid of the dead weight. My brother-in-law, the old leech. I had him and his son thrown out today." My fists clenched at my sides. I bit the inside of my cheek until I tasted copper to keep from screaming. "Oh my God!" the woman gasped. "The one who lived in the car?" Victoria took a long sip of wine. "He is finished. I filed for custody this morning. The state took the boy. And once the boy is in the system, Warren will break. He will sign over the voting rights to the Galloway shares just to get him back. And once I have those shares, Charles and I will own this town." I pulled out my phone. My thumb hovered over the record button. I had missed the beginning, but I needed her to say it again. I needed the confession. But isn't that illegal? The woman asked, lowering her voice. Taking the boy, Victoria waved her hand dismissively. Who is going to believe a senile old man over me? I have the judges in my pocket. I have the doctors. By next week, Warren will be in a state-run nursing home, drooling into a cup, and I will be sitting on the board of Galloway Industries. There it was, the smoking gun. She admitted to the conspiracy. She admitted to buying off the judges. She admitted that Leo was just a pawn. I stopped the recording. I had it. I had everything. Come on, Victoria said, pushing off the desk. Let's go downstairs. I want to open the vintage Dom Perignon to Warren Hensley. May he rot in peace. They clinked glasses and walked out of the room, leaving the door wide open. Their laughter faded down the hallway. I waited for a full minute, my heart pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. Then I stepped out from behind the curtains. I walked over to the safe, closed the panel, and wiped the handle of the desk with my sleeve. I moved to the window. I wasn't going to risk the hallway again. I unlocked the latch and pushed the sash up. We were on the second floor, but there was a trellis covered in thick ivy running down the side of the house. I had built it strong enough to hold 50 pounds of plant weight. I prayed it would hold 180 pounds of angry father. I climbed out into the cold night air. The wind hit my face, drying the sweat on my forehead. As my feet touched the soft earth of the flower bed below, I looked back up at the house. The music was still playing. The champagne was still flowing. They were celebrating my demise. Celebrate while you can, Victoria, I whispered, patting the pocket where the camera and phone lay safe. Because tomorrow the hangover is going to be fatal. I slipped back into the darkness, moving toward the spot where I had hidden my car. I drove away without turning on my headlights until I was a mile down the road. I didn't go back to the apartment. I drove straight to Catherine Vance's office. The war was over. The slaughter was about to begin. The courtroom smelled of lemon polish and old lies. It was a smell I knew well from my days as a contractor when I had to sue developers for unpaid invoices. But this was not a contract dispute. This was a slaughter. I sat at the defendant table next to Catherine Vance. My hands were folded on the mahogany surface, clenched so tight my knuckles were white. Across the aisle, Victoria Halstead sat with her high-priced legal team. She was wearing a modest navy dress and a pearl necklace. She looked like the grieving aunt, the concerned matriarch, the victim of a stubborn old man's pride. She did not look like a thief who had stolen $150,000 from a disabled man. She did not look like a woman who had laughed about my death while drinking vintage champagne less than 12 hours ago. The judge, the Honorable Marcus Thorne, looked down from his bench with eyes that were already tired. He was a man who had seen too many broken families, and he had clearly already made up his mind about this one. He looked at Victoria with a nod of recognition. Of course he knew the Halsteads. Everyone in this city knew the Halsteads. They funded the charity galas. They built the libraries. They were the pillars of the community. And who was I? I was the man found sleeping in a '99 Honda Civic in a Walmart parking lot. The hearing began with a brutal efficiency. Victoria's lawyer, a man named Mr. Stone, who wore a suit that cost more than my first house, stood up to deliver his opening statement. He didn't shout. He didn't pace. He spoke with a calm, reasonable voice that made his lies sound like gospel truth. Your Honor, Stone began gesturing toward me with an open palm. We are not here to punish Mr. Hensley. We are here to help him. The evidence will show that Warren Hensley is a man who has suffered a severe cognitive decline following the death of his wife. This decline has resulted in a series of catastrophic decisions that have placed his disabled son, Leo, in immediate physical danger. I felt a muscle twitch in my jaw. Catherine placed a hand on my arm, a silent command to stay still. I stared straight ahead at the court reporter's typing fingers. Stone picked up a document from his table. Exhibit A, Your Honor. Police reports dated November 14th. Officers found Mr. Hensley and his son sleeping in a vehicle when temperatures were below freezing. The vehicle had no heat. The child, a 38-year-old man with the mental capacity of a 10-year-old, was malnourished and unwashed. When offered assistance by the family, Mr. Hensley refused. He chose homelessness over stability. He chose to expose his vulnerable son to the elements, rather than accept the generosity of the Halstead family. Lies. It was all lies. I didn't refuse help. Help was never offered. Help was evicted. But I couldn't scream that. Not yet. Stone continued painting a picture of me that was unrecognizable. He described a man consumed by paranoia. He described a man who hoarded trash. He claimed I had cut off contact with the family because I believed they were conspiring against me. And yesterday, Stone said, his voice dropping to a whisper for dramatic effect, when Mrs. Halstead went to his apartment to offer a peace offering, a simple gift basket of food for the child mister, Hensley destroyed it in a fit of rage. We have a witness who heard the sounds of destruction from the hallway. This is not the behavior of a stable guardian, Your Honor. This is a man on the edge of a violent break. I looked at the judge. He was frowning, making notes. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at the file Stone had handed him. The narrative was being set in stone, layer by layer, and I was being buried alive under it. Victoria took the stand next. Her performance was worthy of an Academy Award. She dabbed her eyes with a tissue before she even answered the first question. I just want Leo to be safe, she sobbed softly. I promised my sister on her deathbed that I would look after them. But how? He just changed. He became so angry. I tried to give him money, Your Honor. I tried to set them up in an apartment months ago. He threw the checks in my face. He said he didn't need charity. I didn't know they were sleeping in a car until yesterday. It breaks my heart. I haven't slept a wink thinking about poor Leo out in the cold. She looked at me, then a sad, pitying look. But I saw the glint in her eyes. It was the same look she had given me when she evicted us. It was triumph. She was winning. She was convincing the court that I was the villain of my own tragedy. I wanted to stand up and shout about the listening device under the table. I wanted to scream about the rent money she stole. I wanted to tell the judge that the only reason we were cold was because she had locked us out of our own lives. But I remained frozen. The silence was my shield. If I spoke out of turn, I proved their point. If I got angry, I was the unstable old man they described. So I swallowed the bile rising in my throat. I let the poison seep in. Stone wrapped up his examination with a final damning question. Mrs. Halstead, if the court grants you guardianship today, what is your plan for Leo? Victoria straightened up, looking brave. I will take him home immediately. We have a room ready for him. We have hired a full-time nurse, and we will ensure that his father gets the psychiatric help he clearly needs. We will pay for everything. We are family after all. The judge nodded sympathetically. Thank you, Mrs. Halstead. You may step down. The courtroom felt suffocating. The air was too thin. I looked at the empty chair next to me, where Leo should have been. I imagined him in a state facility right now, scared, waiting for me to come get him. I had failed him once. I was not going to fail him again. It was our turn. The judge looked at Catherine Vance. He checked his watch, clearly expecting this to be a quick formality. He expected a plea for leniency. He expected us to beg for visitation rights. Ms. Vance, the judge said, his tone bored. Do you have any witnesses to call, or can we move to closing arguments? I have a full docket this afternoon. Catherine stood up. She smoothed the front of her suit. She didn't look at the judge. She looked at Victoria Halstead, who was now sitting back at the plaintiff's table, whispering something to her lawyer. Victoria looked comfortable. She looked safe. Catherine picked up a heavy file from our table. She walked slowly to the center of the room. The sound of her heels clicking on the floor was the only noise in the room. Your Honor, Catherine said, her voice clear and steady. We do not have closing arguments. In fact, we are just beginning. The defense disputes every single assertion made by the plaintiff. We dispute the claim of poverty. We dispute the claim of mental instability. And we certainly dispute the claim that Mrs. Halstead has the best interests of Leo Hensley at heart. Mr. Stone stood up, objecting lazily. Your Honor, this is a waste of the court's time. The facts are not in dispute. The man was living in a car. Catherine ignored him. She turned to the judge. Your Honor, the narrative you have heard is a carefully constructed fiction designed to conceal a systematic embezzlement of funds belonging to my client. We are not here to ask for mercy. We are here to present evidence of a crime. The judge paused, his pen hovering over the paper. He looked over his glasses at Catherine. That is a serious accusation, counselor, the judge said, his voice sharpening. This is family court, not criminal court. If you have evidence of fraud, you should file a separate motion. We will, Your Honor, Catherine said. But this evidence speaks directly to the fitness of the petitioner to serve as guardian. You cannot grant custody of a vulnerable adult to the person who stole his inheritance. Victoria shifted in her seat. The color drained slightly from her face, but she maintained her composure. She probably thought we were bluffing. She probably thought we only had the deed to the building, which she could explain away as a misunderstanding. Catherine walked back to our table and picked up a small black device. It was the voice recorder from under the coffee table. She also picked up a stack of photographs, the ones I had taken in the dark hanging from a trellis. We have more than just accusations, Your Honor, Catherine said. We have the receipts. Victoria's lawyer stood up again, looking annoyed. Your Honor, I have not seen this evidence. This is trial by ambush. It is rebuttal evidence, Mr. Stone, Catherine shot back. And it was obtained legally. Catherine turned to the bailiff. The defense calls a surprise witness, she announced. A witness who has been silent for 10 years. A witness who can testify not only to the financial theft happening today, but to the gross negligence that caused Leo Hensley's disability in the first place. The courtroom doors opened. Every head turned. Victoria twisted in her seat, her eyes narrowing. She expected maybe a neighbor, maybe a character reference. Before I reveal who walked through those doors, tell me on a scale of 1 to 10. How curious are you right now about what happens next? Drop your answer in the comments. I need to know you're still with me on this. And a quick reminder, parts of what follows may be fictionalized for storytelling purposes. If that's not for you, feel free to stop here. But when the old man walked in clutching a battered water-stained notebook to his chest, Victoria Halstead didn't just turn pale. She stopped breathing. Charles Halstead, who had been sitting in the back row of the gallery, stood up so fast, his chair scraped loudly against the floor. The witness walked down the aisle. He looked tired. He looked scared. But he walked with the steady gait of a man who was done carrying a heavy load. Your Honor, Catherine said, pointing to the man, the defense calls Mr. Joseph Miller, former site foreman for Halstead Construction, and we would like to submit into evidence this field diary labeled Defense Exhibit 14. I looked at Victoria. Her mask had finally cracked. Her mouth was slightly open. Her hands were gripping the table so hard her fingernails were digging into the wood. She knew. She knew exactly what was in that book. I leaned back in my chair. The suffocating smell of lemon polish suddenly smelled fresh. The weight on my chest lifted. I looked at the judge, who was now looking at Joe Miller with intense curiosity. Mr. Hensley, Catherine whispered to me as she passed. Get ready. It is demolition time. I nodded. I wasn't just ready. I was holding the sledgehammer. The lies were about to crumble, and I was going to enjoy watching every single brick fall. The silence that followed Joe Miller's entrance was heavy enough to crush a man. He walked to the front of the room, his boots squeaking slightly on the polished floor, and placed the water-stained notebook on the judge's bench. It was a small, dirty object, in a room full of expensive suits and leather briefcases, but it held more power than all of their money combined. Catherine Vance stepped forward. She didn't look at Victoria. She didn't look at Charles. She looked straight at the judge. Your Honor, Catherine began, her voice ringing clear. This is the daily field log from the Halstead headquarters construction site dated 10 years ago. It has been in Mr. Miller's possession since the day he was wrongfully terminated. The judge picked up the book. He handled it gingerly, as if it were a bomb. He adjusted his glasses and flipped through the yellowed pages. Turn to November 14th, Your Honor, Catherine instructed. I watched Charles Halstead. He was no longer slouching in his chair. He was sitting bolt upright, his face the color of ash. He knew. He remembered. He had probably spent the last decade convincing himself that this book had been shredded along with the rest of the evidence. Seeing it now physically existing in the hands of a judge was like seeing a ghost. The judge found the page. He read it in silence. Then he read it again. His eyebrows pulled together in a deep frown. He looked up, his eyes locking onto Charles Halstead in the gallery. Is this your signature, Mr. Halstead? The judge asked. The question was quiet, dangerous. Charles stood up, his hands shaking. Your Honor, I object. This is ancient history. The statute of limitations on a workplace accident has surely passed. This has nothing to do with the guardianship of Leo Hensley. It has everything to do with it, Catherine cut in, her voice sharp as a whip, because the man who signed that order, the man who authorized the removal of safety bracing to save money, is the same man currently asking this court to give him control over the victim of that very accident. The judge looked back at the book. Ordered removal of secondary bracing cited budget overruns. RS. He read the words out loud. They hung in the air, ugly and undeniable. This isn't just negligence, the judge said, his voice dropping an octave. This is depraved indifference. You crippled a young man to save a day of crane rental fees. Victoria jumped up then. She saw the ship sinking and tried to scramble for a lifeboat. I didn't know, she cried out, looking frantically from the judge to Charles. Your Honor, I had no idea about any of this. Charles handled the construction. I just handle the finances. I am just trying to protect my nephew. You handle the finances? Catherine asked, pivoting smoothly. Then let us discuss your definition of protection. She pressed a button on the small black device she had placed on the evidence table. My voice recorder. The audio was crisp. It filled the courtroom, the sound of clinking glasses, the sound of jazz music, and then Victoria's voice, loud and arrogant. I finally got rid of the dead weight. My brother-in-law, the old leech, I had him and his son thrown out today. The gasps in the courtroom were audible. Victoria froze. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. The recording continued. Once the boy is in the system, Warren will break. He will sign over the voting rights, and Charles and I will own this town. Catherine stopped the playback. The silence that returned was absolute. It was the silence of a predator having its throat exposed. Victoria Halstead, Catherine said, pointing a finger at the woman who had tormented us for months. You did not file for guardianship to save Leo. You filed for guardianship to use him as leverage in a corporate takeover. You stole his inheritance to buy your cars and throw your parties. And when that wasn't enough, you tried to steal his freedom. Victoria collapsed back into her chair. She looked small now. The facade of the benevolent aunt was gone, stripped away to reveal the greedy hollow shell underneath. She looked at her lawyer, but missed her. Stone was busy packing his briefcase. He knew a lost cause when he saw one. The judge closed the field diary. He took a deep breath and interlaced his fingers. When he spoke, his voice was no longer bored. It was thundering. In my 20 years on the bench, I have seen many things, Judge Thorne said, staring down at the Halsteads. But I have rarely seen such a calculated, malicious dismantling of a family. He banged his gavel. The sound was the sweetest music I had ever heard. The petition for emergency guardianship is denied with prejudice, the judge ruled. Mrs. Halstead, you are hereby ordered to vacate the position of trustee for the Hensley estate immediately. An independent forensic accountant will be appointed by this court to audit every transaction you have made in the last 10 years. If a single penny is unaccounted for, you will be held in contempt. But he wasn't finished. He turned his gaze to the back of the room. Bailiff secured the doors. Charles Halstead tried to move toward the exit, but two deputies stepped in his path. Mr. Halstead, the judge continued, based on the evidence presented in Exhibit 14, I am referring this matter to the district attorney's office with a recommendation to open a criminal investigation into gross negligence causing bodily harm and falsification of safety records. You are not leaving this building today without a police escort. No! Charles shouted, panic finally breaking through his arrogance. You can't do this. I am Charles Halstead. I own half this city. Not anymore, I thought. And as for Leo Hensley, the judge said, his voice softening. Where is he? Miss Ross, the social worker who had dragged Leo away yesterday, stood up. She looked terrified. She was realizing she had been a pawn in Victoria's game. He is in the holding room, Your Honor, down the hall. Bring him here, the judge ordered, immediately. The doors opened. I stood up. My legs felt weak, but my heart was pounding so hard I thought it would burst. A moment later, I saw him. Leo was walking between two guards, looking small and scared. He was wearing the same clothes he had on yesterday. His eyes were red from crying. He looked up. He saw the judge. He saw the police. He shrank back, and then he saw me. "Daddy," he screamed. He broke away from the guards. He didn't run like a 38-year-old man. He ran like the boy he was in his mind. He ran straight into my arms. I caught him. I buried my face in his neck, smelling the sweat and the fear, but also the smell of my son. I held him so tight I thought I might crush him. "I got you." I whispered, tears streaming down my face, soaking his shirt. "I got you, Leo. Nobody's ever taken you away again." The courtroom erupted into chaos. Charles was shouting as the deputies handcuffed him. Victoria was weeping not for us, but for herself. But I didn't care. I didn't look at them. I held my son, feeling his heart beat against mine. "Let's go home, Leo," I said. We walked out of that courtroom, not as victims, but as victors. I looked back one last time at Joe Miller. He gave me a small nod. I nodded back. The debt was paid. The foundation was fixed, and the walls of the Halstead Empire were crumbling down behind us. Preston Galloway died 3 days after the court hearing. He passed away in his sleep quietly without pain, which was a mercy for a man who had fought so hard for every breath at the end. I went to the funeral. I stood in the back holding Leo's hand. It was a massive affair filled with politicians, celebrities, and business rivals who came to make sure the old lion was truly dead. I saw Victoria and Charles there too. They stood in the front row dressed in black, looking like grieving relatives. It was a performance, of course. They were terrified. Charles was out on bail pending the grand jury indictment for the safety violations. Victoria was facing a forensic audit that was already uncovering a decade of theft. But they were Halsteads. They believed that until the prison cell door actually locked, there was always a way out. They believed that money could fix anything. The reading of the will took place the following Monday in the main conference room of Vance and Associates. It was a room designed to intimidate, with a table long enough to land a plane on and windows that looked down on the entire city. I sat at one end. Catherine sat at the head of the table with a sealed document. The Halsteads sat at the far end. They shouldn't have been there. They weren't named in the preliminary beneficiary list. But their lawyers had filed an injunction claiming that, as blood relatives of Preston's late wife, they had a right to be present to contest any irregularities. They were grasping at straws. They were desperate to find a loophole, a technicality, anything that would give them leverage to stop the avalanche that was coming for them. Charles looked terrible. His skin was gray, his eyes bloodshot. He kept tapping a gold pen against the table, a nervous tick I remembered from the days he used to rush me on the construction site. Victoria was more composed, but it was a brittle composure. She stared at me with pure hatred. If looks could kill, I would have dropped dead right there on the expensive carpet. Catherine opened the envelope. The sound of the paper tearing was loud in the silent room. She began to read. It was standard legal language at first. Bequests to charities, allowances for long-time staff, the establishment of the trust that would manage the majority of his assets. The Halsteads listened bored. They didn't care about the charities. They cared about the control. Then Catherine looked up. She looked directly at Charles Halstead. Regarding the real estate portfolio, she read, "I, Preston Galloway, being of sound mind, do hereby address the matter of the land parcel designated as Plot 44B in the downtown district." Charles stopped tapping his pen. He sat up straighter. Plot 44B. I saw the recognition in his eyes. He knew that designation. To my longtime rival and brother-in-law, Charles Halstead. The will continued. I leave nothing, not a single cent, not a single share of stock. However I feel, it is important to clarify the status of the land upon which the Halstead Global Headquarters currently sits. The room went deadly quiet. Even the air conditioning seemed to stop humming. As Mr. Halstead is well aware, Catherine read, her voice steady and professional. The Halstead headquarters was built in 1925 on land that was not purchased but leased. It was a 99-year ground lease signed by his grandfather and my father. That lease granted the Halstead family the right to build and occupy the structure provided they paid the annual rent. However, the lease contains a standard reversion clause. Upon the expiration of the 99-year term, if the lease is not renewed, ownership of the land and all improvements upon it, including the building itself, reverts to the landowner. Charles's face went from gray to white. He whispered something. No, that is not until next year. Catherine turned the page. The lease expired yesterday, she said. Sunday, the day after Mr. Galloway passed. She looked at me. In his final act, Mr. Galloway transferred the deed to Plot 44B, encompassing the land in the 30-story office tower known as Halstead Headquarters, to a new owner. He felt that the land should belong to a man who understands the value of a good foundation, a man who builds things rather than destroys them. She slid a heavy document across the mahogany table toward me. Mr. Hensley, she said, congratulations, you are now the sole owner of the Halstead Global Headquarters. I looked at the document. I saw the map of the city block. I saw my name, Warren Hensley, owner. I looked up at Charles. He looked like he had been shot in the chest. He slumped back in his chair, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. You can't do this, he stammered. That building is worth $200 million. It is our headquarters. It is our legacy. It is a pile of bricks sitting on my dirt, I said. My voice was calm. I wasn't shouting. I didn't need to shout. I held the paper that made me a king in their world. Victoria slammed her hand on the table. This is insane. You can't just take our building. We will sue. We will tie this up in court for decades. You can try, Catherine said coolly, but the reversion clause is ironclad. It is standard property law, Mrs. Halstead. When a ground lease expires, the tenant becomes a squatter. Mr. Hensley has the right to evict you, or he has the right to set new terms. Charles looked at me. For the first time in his life, he didn't look down on me. He looked at me with fear. He realized that the man he had mocked, the man he had cheated, the man he had left to freeze in a parking lot, now held the keys to his entire existence. Without that headquarters, the Halstead Group had no assets to leverage against their debts. They were finished, Charles whispered. Hal, please. We are family. I laughed. It was a dry, short sound. It's family. Family is who you protect, Charles. Family isn't who you leave to die in the cold. I stood up. I picked up the deed. I felt the weight of it. It wasn't just paper. It was justice. I am not going to evict you today, Charles, I said. I am a reasonable man. I am going to give you exactly the same courtesy you gave me in Leo. I looked at my watch. You have 24 hours to vacate the premises. I want every employee, every file, and every stick of furniture out of my building by noon tomorrow. If you are not gone, I will call the sheriff to remove you for trespassing. But we can't move a headquarters in a day, Victoria shrieked. It is impossible. I leaned across the table. I looked her right in the eyes, the same eyes that had watched my son get dragged away. I lived in a car for 6 months, Victoria. You figure it out. I turned to Catherine. Miss Vance, I said, I believe we are done here. I have a building to inspect. I want to make sure the foundation is safe. I walked out of the conference room. I didn't look back. I heard Victoria screaming at her lawyers. I heard Charles sobbing. But those sounds were fading, getting smaller and smaller, like a radio station losing its signal as you drive out of town. I walked to the elevator and pressed the button for the lobby. I had a lot of work to do. I had to hire a management team. I had to set up the trust for the brain injury clinic. But first I was going to pick up my son. We were going to go to the finest steakhouse in the city. And tomorrow we were going to walk into the Halstead headquarters, and I was going to show Leo the view from the top floor. The view that belonged to us, the view of a city that had tried to break us and failed. The lobby of the Halstead headquarters was a cathedral of glass and marble, designed to make anyone who entered feel small. I remembered laying these floors 20 years ago. My knees still ached when it rained from the hours spent kneeling on this stone, making sure every grout line was perfect. Back then I was just the hired help, invisible to the executives rushing past in their Italian suits. Today I walked in through the revolving doors, and the security guards didn't stop me. They didn't ask for ID. They simply stepped aside, tipping their caps, because the memo had already gone out. The building might still have the Halstead name on the sign, but the ground beneath their feet belonged to Warren Hensley. I took the private elevator to the 30th floor. The doors opened directly into the executive suite where Charles and Victoria were waiting. The room smelled of stale coffee and panic. Boxes were already stacked in the corners, a premature admission of defeat. Charles was pacing by the window, his tie loosened, looking out at the city he used to think he owned. Victoria was sitting at the massive conference table, clutching a glass of water with both hands. She looked 10 years older than she had at the party. When I walked in, Charles spun around. He didn't sneer. He didn't laugh. He looked like a man who had seen his own executioner. "Hal," he started, his voice cracking. "We can work this out. We can find a compromise. I have spoken to the board. We can offer you a seat. We can offer you a payout. Name your price." I walked to the head of the table. I didn't sit down. I placed the deed on the polished wood surface. "My price," I said calmly, "is simple. You are currently trespassing on my property. The lease expired 48 hours ago. Legally, I can have the sheriff escort you out right now." Victoria looked up, her eyes red-rimmed. "You wouldn't do that. Think of the employees. Think of the families who rely on this company." "I am thinking of families, Victoria," I said. "I am thinking of a family of 2 who lived in a Honda Civic because you stole their rent money. I am thinking of a father who had to watch his son get dragged away by strangers because you wanted a leverage play." I leaned forward, resting my knuckles on the table. "Here are the new terms," I said. "I am willing to sign a month-to-month lease extension." Charles let out a breath of relief. "Thank God, Hal, thank you. I knew you were a reasonable man." I wasn't finished. I cut him off. "The new rent is $5 million a month payable in advance." Charles's jaw dropped. $5 million. That is a 500% increase. That is insanity. We can't afford that. Our margins are razor thin as it is." "Then you have a choice," I said, shrugging. "You can pay the rent, or you can move your building." Move the building," Charles sputtered. "Hal, this is a 30-story skyscraper. You can't move it." "Exactly," I said, cold as ice. "The building is yours, Richard. The bricks, the glass, the steel. It is all yours, but it is sitting on my dirt. And if you can't pay the rent, I want your property off my land. You have 30 days to dismantle it and take it somewhere else. Or you can walk away and leave it all to me." 30 days, Patricia shrieked. "It would take a year to relocate headquarters." I looked at her. I really looked at her. Not with the hatred I once felt, but with something closer to indifference. She was nothing to me now. Just another tenant who couldn't pay the rent. "You gave me 6 hours to leave my home," I said softly. "You gave me 0 notice when you froze my accounts. You gave me nothing. 30 days is generous." I turned to leave. I had said what I came to say. My footsteps echoed across the marble floor, each one a drumbeat marking the end of their empire. "Hal!" Richard shouted after me, desperation cracking his voice. "If we lose this building, the stock will crash. The creditors will call in the loans. We will be bankrupt." I stopped at the elevator doors and pressed the button. The polished brass reflected my face back at me. I looked older, yes, but not defeated. Not anymore. "I know," I said without turning around. "It is a terrible thing to lose your home, isn't it? Make sure you pack warm clothes, Richard. It gets cold at night." The elevator doors opened. I stepped inside and turned to face them one final time. They stood frozen in the center of that vast executive suite, 2 people who had once seemed so powerful, now looking small and lost. The doors slid shut, severing that connection forever. It took less than a month for the Sterling Empire to crumble. The news of the lease expiration hit the market like a nuclear bomb. Financial networks ran breaking news alerts. Analysts scrambled to explain how a company worth hundreds of millions could evaporate overnight. The stock plummeted 90% in 3 days. Pension funds that had invested in Sterling pulled out immediately. Business partners severed contracts. Suppliers demanded payment up front. The board of directors fired Richard before the week was out, trying desperately to save face, but it was too late. The Sterling name had become toxic. No amount of crisis management could repair what had been exposed. The forensic audit ordered by the judge was the final nail in the coffin. It uncovered years of tax evasion, embezzlement, and safety violations that went beyond anything the prosecutors had initially suspected. There were falsified inspection reports dating back decades. bribery payments to city officials, a web of shell companies designed to hide stolen money. The deeper they dug, the more rot they found. Patricia was arrested 2 weeks later at the airport, trying to board a flight to the Cayman Islands with a suitcase full of jewelry and 3 different passports. The news footage showed her being led away in handcuffs, her designer clothes, and perfect makeup, unable to hide the fear in her eyes. The woman who had once lectured me about responsibility was now facing 20 years in federal prison. Richard was indicted on felony charges for the negligence that caused Leo's accident, along with fraud, racketeering, and criminal endangerment. The prosecution had everything they needed: Joe Miller's field diary, the falsified safety reports, testimony from workers who had been threatened into silence for years. They turned on each other instantly, predictably. Patricia testified against Richard to get a reduced sentence, revealing secrets she had kept for decades. Richard gave up Patricia's offshore accounts to try and save his own skin. They tore each other apart with the same viciousness they had once used on me, fighting over scraps while their empire burned around them. I didn't go to their trials. I didn't need to see them in handcuffs to know I had won. Their punishment wasn't my concern anymore. I had better things to do. I had a son who needed me and a future to build. 6 months later, I sat on a wooden bench in a park filled with sunlight. The air was warm, carrying the scent of fresh-cut grass and blooming lilacs. Children played on swings nearby, their laughter mixing with the gentle sound of water from the fountain. Across the lawn near the duck pond, where families tossed breadcrumbs, a group of adults were playing a game of kickball. They were laughing, shouting encouragement to each other, moving with the uncoordinated joy of people who had forgotten how to play and were remembering. Among them was a man in a blue jersey running toward first base with a clumsy but joyous gait. Leo. He was laughing, his face lit up with pure happiness. He wasn't scared. He wasn't hungry. He wasn't looking over his shoulder wondering where we would sleep tonight. He was safe, truly completely safe in a way I had once thought impossible. Behind the park stood a newly renovated brick building. It had good bones, solid construction, the kind of work that lasts. The sign out front, carved in limestone by an artisan who donated his time, read the Leo Bennett Center for Neurorehabilitation. I had used the first rent check from the new tenants of the tower, a tech company that was happy to pay fair market value to buy this place. It had been abandoned for years, neglected and forgotten, but I saw what it could become. I hired the best doctors, the best therapists, and the kindest staff money could buy. Not just qualified people, but compassionate ones who understood that healing takes time and patience. It was a place for people like Leo, people who had been broken by a world that moved too fast for them. People who had been dismissed, warehoused, forgotten. People who needed patience, not pity. Understanding, not judgment. Leo kicked the ball and cheered, raising his arms to the sky in triumph. He looked over at the bench and waved his smile so wide it made my chest ache. "Dad, look, I made a home run." I waved back, a lump forming in my throat. "I am watching, son. I see you." And I did see him, not as a burden or a tragedy, but as my son, my Leo. Perfect exactly as he was. I leaned back on the bench and closed my eyes, letting the sun warm my face. I thought about the cold nights in the car, the frost on the windows, the sound of Leo's teeth chattering. I thought about the shame, the anger, the despair that had wrapped around me like chains. It felt like a lifetime ago, like it had happened to someone else entirely. I touched the fabric of my jacket. It was warm. My pockets were not empty. There was a wallet inside, with money, not a fortune, but enough, more than enough. But more importantly, my heart was full of hope, full of purpose, full of love, for the boy playing kickball across the lawn. They thought I was just a builder. They thought I was good for nothing but laying bricks and pouring concrete. They forgot that a builder knows how to spot a crack in the foundation. They forgot that a builder knows how to bring a structure down, just as well as he knows how to put one up. And they forgot the most important rule of all. You can mess with a man's money. You can mess with his pride. You can take his house and his dignity. But you never ever mess with his children, because a father protecting his child is the most dangerous force in the world. I opened my eyes and watched my son run. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was living. And for the first time in a long time, the future didn't look like a dark tunnel closing in around me. It looked like a wide-open field, green and bright, stretching toward a horizon filled with possibility, waiting for us to build something new together. Looking back now, I still struggle to recognize the man I became during those months. I never imagined I would turn into someone who slept lightly trusted. No one documented every conversation and measured every smile for hidden intent. That version of me was forged by pain, by hunger, by fear, and by something even more corrosive, betrayal from inside my own family. This was never the story I wanted to live through, but it became the story I had to survive. If there is one thing I want you to hear clearly, it is this: don't be like me. Don't wait until everything collapses before you start paying attention. I ignored signs because I wanted peace. I accepted explanations because confrontation felt exhausting. I chose silence because I believed blood meant loyalty. That choice nearly cost me the only person who truly depended on me. Family betrayal does not arrive with violence. At first, it arrives quietly disguised as concern, paperwork, and polite smiles. When I look back, the warning signs were there long before I lost my home. Money conversations that felt one-sided. Decisions made on my behalf without my consent. Documents signed during moments of grief when I was too tired to question them. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself that families don't destroy their own. That lie was more dangerous than any enemy outside my door. This family story is not about villains in the shadows. It is about what happens when trust is given freely and taken without mercy. I also learned something uncomfortable about myself. I believed being patient meant being wise. I believed endurance was the same as strength. But patience without boundaries is surrender, and endurance without awareness is self-destruction. I confused love with tolerance. I confused silence with dignity. By the time I realized the difference, I was already sleeping in a car counting coins, convincing myself that survival was enough. It wasn't. Survival is not living. It is only the pause before you decide whether to fight or disappear. This experience forced me to confront a hard truth. Justice is not loud. It is not impulsive. It does not announce itself in anger. Justice is slow, methodical, and deeply uncomfortable. Revenge burns fast and consumes everything, including the person who seeks it. Justice, on the other hand, requires restrained evidence and patience. I chose justice not because it was easier, but because it was the only path that would not destroy what remained of my soul. That distinction saved me. There were nights when I questioned whether continuing was worth it. Nights when exhaustion whispered that giving up would hurt less. In those moments, I held on to one belief: that I was not meant to walk away silently from wrongdoing. I believe now that God places us in storms not to break us, but to reveal what we are willing to protect when everything else is stripped away. That belief steadied my hands when fear tried to take control. What hurts most about family betrayal is not the loss of money or comfort. It is the way it rewrites your understanding of people. After this, I will never hear the word family the same way again. I will never assume shared meals mean shared values. I will never confuse proximity with loyalty. That is the lasting cost. Trust does not regenerate easily once it has been weaponized. This family story left scars that no courtroom victory could erase. If you are listening to this and something feels familiar, don't ignore that feeling. Pay attention when actions don't match words. Pay attention when someone benefits from your confusion. Pay attention when your instincts warn you, even if logic tells you to stay calm. Document what feels off. Ask questions early. Protect yourself before you are forced to rebuild from nothing. I waited too long because I didn't want conflict. That delay almost took everything that mattered. My personal belief, shaped by years of work, and one devastating lesson is simple: trust must be earned continuously, not assumed permanently. People change. Circumstances reveal character. And sometimes the people closest to you are the ones most capable of rationalizing harm, if it serves their goals. That doesn't mean live in fear. It means live with clarity. Boundaries are not cruelty, they are survival. This family story is not meant to inspire hatred or suspicion. It is meant to remind you that awareness is not the same as cynicism. You can love deeply and still protect yourself. You can forgive without forgetting. You can move forward without pretending nothing happened. What I lost can never be fully restored, but what I gained was something I never had before: certainty about who I am and what I will no longer tolerate. Now, I want to hear from you. If this story stirred something inside, you leave a comment below. What moment hit closest to home for you? Have you ever felt let down by someone you trusted? Sharing your thoughts helps others realize they're not alone. If this video resonated, consider sharing it with someone who might need it, and subscribe to the channel to support more stories that explore resilience, boundaries, and hard-earned lessons. Thank you sincerely for staying with me until the very end. I know this was not an easy story to hear, and it was even harder to live through. Your time and attention matter more than you know. Finally, a respectful note. This story contains certain fictionalized elements carefully constructed for educational and reflective purposes. If this kind of content does not align with what you're looking for, please feel free to exit and choose other material that suits you better. There is no judgment, only appreciation for your choice.